I'm Jeff Helgeson here in Heirloom Books at 6239 North Clark Street in Chicago, Illinois. As in my previous presentation, the work I'll be talking about today is also a sacred text that influenced the lives of countless numbers of people throughout huge portions of the world, including almost 25% of the current global population. Over a span of 14 centuries, the 114 chapters gathered together to form the Quran have clearly affected much of human history. In 622 of the current era, a dozen years after first experiencing a visitation by the Archangel Gabriel, Jibril in Arabic, the Prophet Muhammad and his followers were forced to withdraw from the city of Mecca to Yathrib, subsequently becoming called Medina, meaning the city of the Prophet. In total, the founder of Islam, a term which means submission to the will of God, Muhammad, the orphan son of Abdullah at the age of 6, who eventually became a successful merchant and caravan leader, necessarily coming in contact with people both Jewish and Christian from throughout the Middle East, was visited by Jibril a total of 3 times over a period of 23 years. During these encounters, the message within the Quran was revealed, beginning in the translation that I have owned for a number of years with the words, "In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, praise be to God, Lord of the worlds, the compassionate, the merciful, King on the day of reckoning. Thee only do we worship, and to thee do we cry for help. Guide thou us on the straight path, the path of those to whom thou hast been gracious, with whom thou art not angry, and who go not astray." Like any piece of literature, whether sacred or secular, there is, of course, the story of its transcription, which can be often as compelling as much of the work itself. The glorious Quran is clearly an example of this. In fact, the very existence of the text at all may on some levels be almost as miraculous as the periodic appearances of its divine messenger. To begin, the Holy Quran was not written until as many as 20 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632, just 10 years after having been expelled from Mecca. Rather than having been transcribed from dictation following interactions with the celestial intermediary, the book was assembled through a process of gathering together passages that had been written upon whatever material had been available at the time of the encounters. These included scraps of leather, palm leaves, the bones of various animals, in addition to a process of consulting the memory of individuals who had originally been told about the revelations by Muhammad himself. What resulted was a sequence of chapters that have generally been arranged by length, with the longest appearing first and the shortest being included later, even though they may frequently have been received earlier. For example, the very first verse recorded in the Quran, called the Qlat, is presented as number 96 in its arrangement, saying, "In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, read, in the name of thy Lord who createth man from clots of blood, read thou, For thy Lord is the most beneficial, who hath taught through the use of the pen, hath taught man that which he knoweth not. The segments were then titled in accordance with the subjects they address and include such names as the cow, the table, the spoils, immunity, Abraham, on whom be peace, the prophets, the pilgrimage, the believers, light, the poets, the ant, the story, sad, smoke, and unbelievers, concluding with the verse titled Men, which says, In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, say, I betake me for refuge to the Lord of men, the King of men, the God of men, against the mischief of the stealthy withdrawing whisperer, who whispereth in man's breast against the genie spirits, or demons, and men. Between its opening and closing passages, the Quran presents a central theme, which is the defense of monotheism and the assertion that the one God, Allah, is the creator of heaven and earth, and in philosophic terms, the sufficient cause for all existence. There's also a strong belief in a final fate for the universe, the day of judgment, the last day, the day of the meeting with God, which will be accompanied by cosmic upheaval, with mountains dissolving, seas boiling, stars falling, the sun being darkened, and the sky being rolled up. Additionally, the 5 pillars of Islam are presented. Declaration of faith, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Prayer, 5 times a day, dawn, noon, afternoon, evening, and night. Almsgiving in support of the poor and to help maintain holy sites and mosques. Fasting during the holy month of Ramadan, the 9th month of the Islamic lunar year, unless potentially dangerous, such as for pregnant women, diabetics, and prepubescent children, with the observance being to refrain from eating, beginning when the whiteness of the day becomes distinct from the blackness of the night at dawn, and continuing until after sunset, and finally the Hajj, a pilgrimage to the Kaaba, holy site in Mecca, during the 12th month of a lunar year, at least once in a person's lifetime, if at all possible. Also, although not specifically expressed within the Quran, but because the word meaning maker of forms is used to describe God, as well as that strong opposition to idolatry, there's a tradition of avoiding the visual depictions of living beings, and especially representations of God, the Prophet Muhammad, and members of his family. In addition to a practice of in some way obscuring the face of the Prophet in any figurative scenes where he might otherwise appear, this precaution against potential idolatry, reinforced by an assertion from the Prophet that no angel would enter a home in which idols were contained, has resulted in amazingly ornate and highly expressive geometric patterns and calligraphy with regard to Islamic art, examples of which might be most familiar from the intricate designs evident in what are commonly termed Persian rugs. Also, because of the belief that only God is perfect, Islamic artists commonly make intentional errors within their complex, abstract, geometric, and semi-naturalistic patterns. In addition to these various practices, There's also a general acknowledgement in Islam that scientific knowledge is a tool to achieve the goals of the Quran, as well as an assertion that men shall have preeminence above women. In terms of literary style, the Quran is generally written in rhymed prose and is highly self-referential, frequently acknowledging itself to be the product of divine revelation. Until the 19th century, every Quran had been copied by hand, although some wood block printing of passages did start to appear as early as the year 1000. Although a printer in Venice produced a copy of the text in 1538, printing of the Quran in Arabic was prohibited on pain of death from 1483 to 1726, and a first authorized printed edition did not appear until 1834, with the currently accepted version of the text having been published by a Cairo university in 1924. Along with the theological and ethical content which it contains, the Quran also provides a historical record of events beginning with the first revelation from Jibril and continuing through the period of persecution in Mecca, followed by the move some 220 miles to the north to Medina, the city of the Prophet, where Muhammad became a political leader among an increasing number of converts, organizing an army to raid caravans and sharing proceeds with the participants. Then, after a period of 8 years, Mecca was forced to surrender, which allowed Muhammad to smash the 360 idols that had been placed in the sacred site of the Kaaba, with the exception of the black stone, a relic that Muhammad himself had set into the wall of the structure some 20 years earlier, which is believed to have been a meteorite that tradition says had fallen from heaven to show Adam and Eve where to build the world's first altar. Following his assumption of a leadership position in Mecca and his declaration of it as the holy city of Islam, within just 2 years, Muhammad succeeded in gaining influence over all of Arabia and began expanding his efforts to get people to make peace with God during what was one of the most successful sets of military conquests in all of world history. The specific guidance provided with Quran with respect to potential enemies being cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve, lie in wait for them in each and every ambush, kill them wherever you find them, and strike off their heads as well as all of their fingertips. By the time the Quran began to be transcribed, Muslim dominance had been established in Syria and Palestine, and in the century following the death of the Prophet in 632, Islam expanded across the Persian Empire to India and the North African coast of the Mediterranean Sea, crossing the Straits of Gibraltar to Spain and on across the Pyrenees into France, before finally being stopped in its expansion in 732 CE by Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, just about 100 miles from Paris. What was established until further expansion under the Ottoman Turks from Asia Minor with the capture of Constantinople, the remaining capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, in 1453, was a realm of influence by 900 CE, which extended from northern India to the Atlantic coast of Portugal, some 5 million square miles, and continued until the reconquest of Spain under Ferdinand and Isabella in 1492. In fact, Edward Gibbon, in the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, observed that the Muslim fleet had not been defeated. The Arabs might have sailed without naval combat into the mouth of the Thames, and perhaps the interpretation of the Quran would now be taught in the schools of Oxford, and her pupils might demonstrate to a circumcised people the sanctity and truth of the revelation of Muhammad. Following the guidance offered by the Quran with respect to knowledge serving as a practical tool, Muslims developed the fields of mathematics, appropriating the concept of zero from India, as well as what are termed Arabic numerals, astrology, astronomy, engineering, and architecture, developing both algebra and trigonometry, in addition to medicine, as well as translating and helping to preserve the works of Plato and Aristotle, establishing the world's first pharmaceutical school, and developing the science of optics. Adding to the writing of verse, which was prevalent throughout the Quran, poetry generally flourished during the period of the Islamic Golden Age between the 8th and 14th centuries, among the best known examples of which is the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam with its famous "A jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou," as well as the observation that the moving finger writes and having writ moves on. Furthermore, in the visual arts, although representational figurative depictions were largely discouraged due to their association with idolatry, the elaborate and even lavish decorations of mosques and other architectural structures became prevalent throughout the Muslim area of influence, from the Taj Mahal in India to the Great Mosque of Cordoba and the Alhambra Palace with its lion court fountains surrounded by delicate pillars and ornately decorated arcades in Granada, Spain. Simply stated, some of the world's most ornate architectural structures were created under the influence of the Islamic aesthetic principles that are rooted in the Quran. As H.W. Jansen states in his also iconic work, The History of Art, the geometric framework of zigzag and rosettes uniformly repeated over the entire width of structures suggests a taste for symmetrical abstract patterns that Ernst J. Gruby in The World of Islam further explains is derived from a message conveyed by the Quran that places emphasis upon the experience of the infinite on the one hand, with the worthlessness of transient earthly existence. Gruby explains further that the infinite continuation of a pattern, whether abstract, semi-abstract, or even partly figurative, is on one hand the expression of profound belief in the eternity of all true being, and on the other, a disregard for temporary existence. in making visible only part of a pattern that exists in its complete form only in infinity, the Islamic artist relates the static, limited, seemingly definite object to infinity itself. It's this kind of application of a cosmic sense of reality conveyed in the Quran that's become evident within the full range of cultural manifestations which have been derived from it. Whether in terms of political unification under the successors of the Prophet Muhammad, the caliphs, the astronomical observations and mathematical developments of Islamic intellectuals, the rich poetry and storytelling of writers, or the architectural marvels that extend from northern India throughout the Middle East and on into southern Spain. It was the influence of the Quran that provided their inspiration. Next time, just to keep things consistent in terms of chronology, I'll be talking about something completely different. A three-part saga from the period following the end of Roman influence in Britain, sometime between 445 and 975 or so CE, which is, of course, Beowulf. Heirloom Books is located at 6239 North Clark Street in Chicago, Illinois. Store is open from noon until 7 o'clock in the evening, 7 days a week. And I'm Jeff Helgeson.